All right, we kick off Lure Lunacy with the opening round matchup. Number 1, Zara Spook versus number 16, a Vibratron Spinnerbait. This particular matchup pits a classic topwater, the Spook that originated back around the 1940s, and it takes on this strange sort of spinnerbait. I have no idea where I got it or if it ever even hit the water. The result of this matchup is the experience of the Spook and some great catches easily are going to push it past the unknown spinnerbait and move the Spook on to the next round. Next matchup pits the Sidewinder Worm at seed number 8 versus the Rapala Fat Wrap at seed number 9. This is an 80s flashback. Both of these baits were mainstays in the kind of meager tackle collection I had back in the day when I first decided that I was going to be a bass fisherman. This heated old school battle ends up with the Sidewinder eking out a victory amid memories of learning how to fish a Texas rigged worm. The next matchup pits number 5 Meps versus number 12, a man's 4- crankbait. The Meps is an original lure from the 80s tackle box, and it's going to compete with a kind of a precursor, a 90s version of the popular square bill crankbaits that are on the market today. In this one, I got to go with the Meps. Dad made sure that I had a good schooling in a Meps. It was one of 2 lures he said you needed in your tackle box back in the 80s when I started this thing. More on the other one at some other time. So the Meps still resides in the tackle box, while the 4-, it stays home in the garage. This one's a 4 seed, the Bomber Flat A crankbait versus number 13 seed, a Lizard. This is one of my favorite cold water crankbaits. Slow moving bait is matching up with a Lizard, which was popular back in the 80s. It's kind of giving way into some of the more interesting kind of creature type baits that are around these days. I guess I'm more into cranking and reeling than pitching out a Lizard or setting it in a bass bed and waiting for a bass to come along and bite. So in this case, Flat A moves on to the next round. At number 6, the Chatterbait matches up with the Rattling Rogue, number 11. This pits a versatile moving sort of bait in the Chatterbait with a kind of a strong wobble to it, creates some commotion, versus a more subtle suspending twitch sort of jerk bait. In this case, I know folks swear by these Chatterbaits, but I just have never been able to dial them in. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and go with the Rogue, because when conditions dictate, I can go ahead and snatch it around at a faster pace, a little bit more frantic retrieve, and get the job done. Next up, number 3, Blue Glimmer Spinnerbait versus a Daredevil Spoon. These Blue Glimmer Spinnerbaits were one of my mainstays in the 90s and 2000s. They quit making them. This is the last one I have intact, still in the package. I'm kind of scared to get it out. Had one out at Lake Storey a couple years ago, and it busted off a blade, so I was kind of bummed on that. As far as a Daredevil Spoon, this is kind of a nostalgic piece here. It takes you back. One of my grandfathers passed away in the 80s, and in his tackle box he had a few of these spoons. In fact, one was kind of the rainbow trout looking color that you see here. It put a hurt on some farm pond bass back in the day when I didn't have much else to throw at them and was just kind of scrounging for whatever I could find. But in the end, the Blue Glimmer is going to win out on this one. It's just one of my favorite spinnerbaits of all time, so it's going to move on to the next round. All right, next up we got number 7, the Rat, versus number 10, the Man's 20-plus crankbait. This is another matchup of classic 80s baits. Covers about the whole spectrum of the water column, from the Rat on top and surface vegetation and mats to the Man's Minus that went to depths that were unheard of before in a crankbait. Both of these have caught a few bass for me, and I really get a kick out of looking at them again. However, I'm going to go with the 20 plus, as it was a revolution in its time, putting a crankbait down where no crankbait had ever gone before. All right, rounding out the regions, number 2, the Booyah Spinnerbait versus number 15 seed, the Ghost Minnow. This Booyah Blade spinnerbait it's been my go-to spinnerbait here probably over the last decade or so, and caught me a lot of fish. The Ghost Minnow, on the other hand, was kind of a flash in the pan, one-hit wonder sort of lure. Back in 2003, Dad and I just tore up some strip mine bass with this one, but it then kind of fell off the radar after its one shining moment. So in this case, definitely the Booyah spinnerbait in a runaway victory.